The night air was thick with tension as Adrian's words sliced through the silence of our living room. "I regret marrying an older woman," he spat out, his eyes devoid of the warmth I once knew. His words stung, a stark reminder of how far we drifted apart. "My name is Alara, a 36-year-old woman working for an international corporation. Life with Adrian, my husband, 3 years my junior, started as a harmonious melody. He was a charismatic leader, the kind who naturally commanded attention. I never minded his dominance. In fact, it brought a sense of balance to our relationship. Our routine was simple. I managed the household chores while Adrian took charge of our outdoor activities. It was a dynamic that worked, until the day my father fell seriously ill. I still remember the frantic call from my mother, her voice trembling, telling me about my father's worsening condition. I rushed to the hospital, only to find that I was too late. The grief was overwhelming, a void that seemed to consume everything, including my marriage. Adrian's lack of empathy during that time was the first crack in our once solid foundation. He didn't come to the hospital, citing urgent work commitments. I tried to understand, to justify his absence, but deep down, I knew something was amiss. As I navigated through the pain of losing my father, Adrian's support was conspicuously absent. His true colors began to show, his once endearing confidence turning into unbearable arrogance. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and dreams, now echoed with arguments and bitter words. "Alara, can't you see I'm under a lot of pressure at work?" Adrian would often say, dismissing my attempts to discuss our strained relationship. I tried to hold on, believing that this was just a phase, a hurdle we could overcome. But the man I married, the man who promised to stand by me through thick and thin, was slowly fading away, replaced by a stranger who wore his face. Tonight was different, though. Tonight his words were like a cold, sharp blade, cutting through any pretense of affection or respect. His disdain was clear, his regret for our marriage palpable. "You're older, Alara. You should be grateful that someone like me chose to marry you," Adrian sneered, his voice laced with contempt. The words hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. The realization dawned on me, harsh and unyielding. The man I loved, the man I had built my life with, saw me as nothing more than a convenience, a mistake he regretted. I stood there silent, the weight of his words crushing me. But amidst the pain, a spark of something else flickered, anger, defiance, perhaps even a hint of liberation. I was more than the sum of my years, more than Adrian's condescending view of me. The night ended with Adrian storming off to our bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. But as I sat there, a plan began to form, a path to reclaiming my life from the shadows of a love that had turned into something unrecognizable. The next morning dawned with a sense of purpose. As I prepared for the day, the resolve in my heart grew stronger. It was time to take a stand, to show Adrian that I was not the weak, older woman he thought he could belittle and discard. The stage was set, and I was ready to turn the tables. It was time for Adrian to see the true strength of the woman he had underestimated. The days following our heated argument felt like walking through a dense fog. Adrian's presence in our home turned into a constant reminder of the deepening chasm between us. His dismissive attitude, once an occasional irritation, had now become a daily occurrence. It was a Thursday evening when things escalated. I had just returned from a grueling day at work, hoping for a quiet night, but the moment I stepped in, I knew peace was a luxury I wouldn't have. "Alara, you're late again." Adrian's voice was cold, devoid of concern. "I had to attend a dinner alone because you couldn't make time." "I had an important meeting, Adrian. I told you this morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's your excuse for everything, isn't it?" "Your work, always your work," he retorted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I felt a familiar surge of frustration. "What do you want me to do, Adrian? Quit my job to cater to your every whim?" His laugh was bitter. "Oh, please, you and your high-flying job. You think you're so important, don't you?" The conversation spiraled from there, each word a sharpened barb aimed to wound. Adrian's ability to twist my words left me reeling. His accusations were baseless, yet delivered with a conviction that made me question my own sanity. "Maybe I was wrong about you, Alara. Maybe you're not the woman I thought I married," he sneered. I couldn't help but laugh, a hollow sound that echoed off the walls. And who did you think you married, Adrian? A submissive wife who would bow to your every demand? He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Maybe I should have. At least she would have appreciated what I do for her. The audacity of his words left me speechless. The man I once saw as my partner, my equal, now stood before me as someone unrecognizable, someone who viewed our marriage as a transaction. As the night wore on, the realization sank in. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was a fundamental mismatch of values and respect. The man I married, who once looked at me with love, now gazed at me with disdain and entitlement. I lay awake that night, the echoes of our argument replaying in my mind. The more I thought, the clearer it became. I couldn't continue living this way. I needed to break free from the oppressive atmosphere that our home had become. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. It was time to start planning my escape from this toxic marriage. I needed to gather my strength, my resources, and most importantly, my dignity. As I left for work, I glanced back at the house, a place that once symbolized love and companionship. Now it stood as a monument to my misplaced trust and a relationship that had soured beyond repair. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for my freedom. Adrian's reign of emotional tyranny was about to come to an end, and I was determined to emerge victorious. The tension in our house was like a thick fog, suffocating and relentless. Adrian's disdain had become more overt, his words more cutting. But it was on the eve of my father's first death anniversary that everything reached a boiling point. "I can't believe you expect me to attend this morbid gathering," Adrian said disdainfully as I prepared for the next day. "It's important to me, Adrian. It's about honoring my father's memory," I replied, my voice laced with a plea for understanding. "Your father, not mine. Why should I have to waste my time?" He scoffed, rolling his eyes. I felt a wave of anger surge through me. "It's not a waste of time to support your wife during a time of grief," Adrian snorted. "Oh, please. It's been a year, Alara. You need to move on. Besides, I have more important things to do." His words stung like a slap. "More important than your wife's feelings?" I shot back, my voice rising. He smirked. "Exactly. I'm glad you're finally understanding where your little family drama stands in the grand scheme of things." That was it, the final straw. My patience, worn thin by months of neglect and disrespect, finally shattered. "You're unbelievable, Adrian. You're selfish, heartless." He leaned in, his eyes cold. "That's rich coming from you, Alara. Always so wrapped up in your work, in your own world." I couldn't contain my fury. "At least I care about others, unlike you." Adrian laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Care? Is that what you call it? It's no wonder your father was always so disappointed in you." That lie, that unfounded accusation about my beloved father, was more than I could bear. "Get out," I hissed, my voice trembling with rage. "What?" Adrian's smirk faded, replaced by a look of surprise. "Get out of this house! I can't stand to look at you anymore!" I shouted, the words erupting from deep within me. For a moment, Adrian looked taken aback, but then his expression hardened. "Fine, if that's what you want. But remember, Alara, you're the one who's going to end up alone." With those parting words, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, shaking, a mix of anger, relief, and profound sadness washing over me. The house was eerily silent, the void left by Adrian's absence, both a balm and a reminder of what our marriage had become. I sank onto the couch, my thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. One thing was clear: I couldn't let Adrian get away with his behavior. It was time for him to learn that his actions had consequences. As I sat there, a plan began to form in my mind. I would not only leave Adrian, but I would also make sure he regretted the way he treated me. He thought he could demean me, abandon me in my time of need, and face no repercussions? He was sorely mistaken. I would start by securing my finances, ensuring I was in a strong position to leave. Then I would gather evidence of Adrian's emotional abuse, his neglect, and his infidelity, if my suspicions were correct. He wouldn't see it coming. He was too arrogant to ever imagine I could be a threat. But I was more than he bargained for. I was Alara, and I was done being the victim. It was time for Adrian to pay for his cruelty, and I was just the person to ensure he did. The morning of my father's death anniversary dawned, a somber reminder of the loss that still echoed in my heart. Adrian had not returned since our explosive argument, and his absence on this significant day only deepened the wound. As I dressed in black, preparing to honor my father's memory, my phone buzzed. It was Adrian, his name on the screen reigniting a flicker of anger. I answered, bracing myself. Alara, I've decided I won't be attending the memorial today. Adrian's voice was casual, almost indifferent. You decided? It's my father's anniversary, Adrian. I couldn't keep the hurt out of my voice. Yeah, well, I have a golf game with some clients. It's important for my career, he replied nonchalantly. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. Your career? Is that all you ever think about? What's that supposed to mean? You're one to talk about obsession with work, he retorted. This isn't about work, Adrian. This is about being there for your wife when she needs you, I shot back, my voice trembling with emotion. Adrian sighed audibly. Look, Alara, we both know you're capable of handling this on your own. You always do. That's not the point, I exclaimed, feeling a surge of frustration. Whatever, Alara, I don't have time for this. I need to get ready, he said, dismissive as ever. The call ended abruptly, leaving me standing in silence, the weight of his absence heavier than ever. It was in that moment, surrounded by the cold walls of our home, that I realized Adrian would never change. He was a man consumed by his own needs, incapable of empathy or support. As I made my way to the memorial service, memories of my father flooded my mind. He had always been my pillar of strength, a guiding light through my darkest days. Now, in his absence, I found myself facing one of my greatest challenges alone. Throughout the service, I put on a brave face, but inside I was seething with a mix of grief and anger. Adrian's blatant disregard for my feelings was a betrayal I couldn't forgive. He had promised to be my partner, to stand by me in good times and bad. Yet here I was, mourning alone, while he played golf. The ride home was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. Adrian had pushed me too far, and it was time he faced the consequences of his selfishness. I began to lay the groundwork for my plan. First, I would secure my financial independence, ensuring I had the resources to leave Adrian for good. Then, I would gather evidence of his neglect and emotional abuse, building a case that would leave him with nothing. As I walked through the door of our now loveless home, I felt a newfound sense of determination. Adrian had underestimated me, mistaking my patience for weakness, but he was about to learn just how strong Alara could be. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing by his rules. It was time for Adrian to face the music, and I would be the one conducting the orchestra. The days following the memorial were a blur of silent preparation and cold determination. I was like a chess player, meticulously planning each move. My first step was to secure my financial independence, a task I approached with a newfound sense of urgency. It was during this time that I made a discovery that would escalate my plans. I found divorce papers on Adrian's desk, already signed. His boldness in preparing for a divorce without even a discussion was a clear message of his disregard for our marriage. Staring at the papers, a mixture of shock and relief washed over me. This was the point of no return. I called Adrian, needing to confront him about this final betrayal. Adrian, I found the divorce papers. Is this how you tell me it's over? My voice was steady, masking the turmoil inside. His laughter chilled me. Oh, you found them? Saves me the trouble of bringing it up. I thought it's what you wanted, given how things have been. His casual dismissal of our marriage ignited a fire within me. You think you can just discard me like this after everything? It's not about discarding, Alara. It's about moving on. I need someone who supports my career, not someone who's always competing with me, he replied, his tone laced with arrogance. The irony of his words was almost laughable. Support your career? What about my career, Adrian? What about supporting me? Adrian scoffed. Your career. Please, Alara, it's always been about you and your achievements. I'm tired of being in your shadow. His words stung, but I refused to let him see my pain. You're delusional, Adrian. You've always been the one in the spotlight. I was just the one behind you, cleaning up your messes. There was a pause, and then Adrian's voice turned cold. Well, Alara, if you're not happy with the divorce, feel free to contest it. But I'm done here. I need a fresh start, with someone who appreciates me. The call ended, leaving me standing in a room filled with memories of a love that had turned sour. But amidst the heartache, there was a sense of liberation. Adrian had shown his true colors, and now it was time for me to paint a new picture of my life. one where he had no place. I would take the divorce papers to the family court, but not before ensuring I had everything in place to leave Adrian with nothing but his arrogance. He thought he could control me, break me down, but he was about to learn that Alara was not a woman to be underestimated. The revenge I planned was not just for me, but for every moment of neglect, every insult, every time he made me feel unworthy. Adrian would regret the day he underestimated the strength of the woman he married. As I set my plan into motion, a sense of empowerment enveloped me. I was no longer the passive wife, bending to Adrian's will. I was a force to be reckoned with, and my storm was just beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. I meticulously gathered evidence of Adrian's neglect and emotional abuse, documenting each instance with precision. It was a grim task, but necessary for the battle ahead. As I prepared for my next move, fate intervened in an unexpected way. I learned through mutual acquaintances that Adrian's career was faltering. His overconfidence had led to several critical mistakes at work, and his reputation was suffering. This news, though not surprising, gave me an added edge. Adrian's world was starting to crumble, and I was ready to give it the final push. Then came the day of reckoning. I confronted Adrian one last time, armed with the evidence I had gathered and a steely resolve. "Adrian, we need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm as he walked through the door. He glanced at me, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "What now, Alara? I'm tired and not in the mood for another one of your lectures." "It's not a lecture. It's about the divorce," I replied, holding up the papers. He smirked. "Finally ready to sign them? Decided to give up?" I met his gaze, unwavering. "No, Adrian, I'm not giving up. I'm fighting back." Confusion replaced his smug expression. "What are you talking about?" "I've gathered evidence, Adrian, evidence of all the times you neglected me, emotionally abused me. I've documented everything, and I know about your failing career." Adrian's face turned pale, his facade cracking. "You wouldn't dare. You think anyone will believe you?" "They will when they see the evidence. And let's not forget your tarnished reputation at work. How do you think that will play out in court?" I countered. For the first time I saw fear in Adrian's eyes. He had underestimated me, thinking I would quietly retreat. But I was no longer the woman he thought he could control. "Alara, you can't do this to me. I'll lose everything," he stammered, the arrogance gone from his voice. "That's the point, Adrian. You took me for granted, treated me like I was nothing. Now, you'll see what it's like to have nothing," I said, the words tasting of sweet revenge. Adrian's defeat was evident in his slumped shoulders and defeated gaze. He had lost not just the battle, but the war. As I watched him leave, a sense of triumph mixed with sadness washed over me. This was not the life I had envisioned, but it was the one I was left with. Adrian had forced my hand, and I had played it to the best of my ability. The days that followed were filled with legal proceedings and negotiations. But with my evidence and Adrian's crumbling professional life, the advantage was mine. The divorce was finalized in my favor, leaving me with a sense of closure and a fresh start. Adrian, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of his actions. His career continued its downward spiral, and he was left with little to his name. It was a harsh outcome, but one he had brought upon himself. As I closed this painful chapter of my life, I looked forward to the future with a sense of hope. I had emerged from the ashes of a broken marriage stronger and more determined. Adrian's betrayal had been painful, but it had also been the catalyst for my transformation. I was no longer the woman he had tried to break. I was Alara, reborn and ready to take on the world. In the aftermath of the divorce, my life took on a new rhythm, one that was entirely my own. The shadow of Adrian's presence had dissipated, leaving me with a newfound sense of freedom. I embraced this change, allowing it to reshape my world. It was during this period of transformation that an opportunity arose, an offer to work at our company's overseas headquarters. It was the kind of opportunity I had dreamed of, but had previously set aside for the sake of my marriage. Now nothing held me back. As I prepared for this new chapter, Adrian reached out, his voice a mixture of desperation and false contrition. "Alara, can we talk? I've been thinking maybe we rushed into this divorce." I couldn't help but feel a bitter satisfaction at his words. "Rushed, Adrian? After everything you've done? After everything you said?" He hesitated, then continued. I know I made mistakes, but we can start over. I've changed. The claim was laughable. Changed? Adrian, you only reach out now because you've seen the consequences of your actions. You haven't changed. You're just scared of being alone. His voice cracked, a sign of his crumbling facade. Alara, please? I need you. I've lost my job, my reputation. I have nothing. The irony of his plea was not lost on me. You need me, or do you need someone to fall back on? I'm not your safety net, Adrian. I'm moving on to a better life, a life I put on hold for you. There was silence on the other end, and then a defeated sigh. So this is really it, then? Yes, Adrian. This is it. Goodbye. I ended the call, a final full stop to our conversation and to our relationship. As I boarded the plane to my new destination, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey I had undertaken. From a woman who had loved and trusted to one betrayed and belittled, and now to a woman reborn with strength and independence. The flight was long, but it gave me time to contemplate. I thought about my father, how he had always encouraged me to pursue my dreams. In a way, this move was a tribute to him, a realization of the aspirations he had always supported. Upon arrival, the new environment was a breath of fresh air. The culture, the people, the work, it was all invigorating. I threw myself into my new role with a passion I hadn't felt in years. My colleagues were welcoming, and I quickly established myself as a valuable member of the team. News from back home trickled in. Adrian's life continued its downward spiral, a path he had chosen through his actions. There was no joy in his misfortune, only a stark reminder of the consequences of selfishness and arrogance. As I settled into my new life, I found a sense of peace that had been missing for years. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer painful. They were reminders of what I had overcome, symbols of my resilience. I occasionally thought of Adrian, wondering if he ever realized the full extent of his mistakes. But those thoughts were fleeting, mere echoes of a past life. My days were filled with new challenges and adventures. I explored my new city, made new friends, and even began to dabble in hobbies I had long neglected. Life was vibrant, full of possibilities. As I looked out at the city skyline one evening, a sense of contentment washed over me. I had faced adversity, fought for my dignity, and emerged victorious. I was Alara, no longer defined by the shadows of a failed marriage, but by the bright promise of a future I had reclaimed. This was not just a new chapter, it was a whole new book. And I was the author, ready to write a story of success, happiness, and true fulfillment.